To order. Sam Hudspeth.
Jordan Stolt.
McGregor Stoko.
Norma Blazer.
Does anyone on the board have any conflicts with anyone for this appeal? No. Okay, this is ex parte communications. And we do have a quorum for the board, this full board here tonight. And the purpose of this hearing is, it's an administrative appeal presented by Mr. Sean Grant of Belgrade Lakes on April 5th, 2018. The planning board denied Mr. Grant an application for commercial use of docks at 24 Hewlin Road. The permit was 11-18. And this board has the authority to conduct a hearing for the following: Belgrade Commercial Development Review Ordinance, Belgrade Shoreline Zoning Ordinance, Belgrade Minimum Lot Size, and Maine State Revised Statutes number 30, 2691, and 4353. On May 3, 2018, the town received an administrative appeal on the planning board's decision, and the Board of Appeals met on May 24, 2018, and found that the application was not complete at that time due to an incomplete site plan as required by town ordinance. The board, after that, met Board of Appeals on June 5th and declared the application was complete. Mr. Grant and Andy Dunbar were here for that discussion. The notice of the hearing was set and required. Mr. Grant was advised. All the municipality officials, papers, everybody had the notice as required. So this is going to be a de novo type review of this application, and the board will receive testimony, review documents as provided by the parties. Applicable town ordinances include those previously referred. In the course of the meeting, the board will take informal straw polls, possibly to help guide the discussion. However, if any straw polls do not reflect a decision by the board tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to try to find a seat?
Would you like to come in? I don't know if there are any seats.
Yeah, we'll go stand at that. We'll be less distracting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for the delay on my arrival. There are obviously a lot of people here tonight who want to speak, and I want to give them that opportunity, so I will try to be as brief as we can be with our presentation, but we need to be thorough. And I think that we can be thorough and brief because, well, I guess I should back up a bit. If you don't know, Sean and Mandy Grant are in the back of the room. Can you stand up, Mandy? Sean and Mandy, and also Andy Dunbar, who's going to assist you in this application process. So, Sean and Mandy are the owners of the property that's in question. The property in question is 21 on the shore side, on the shore side of the road, Hewlin Road. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and it can be very complicated. But in this instance, I think that we can narrow your focus. Plainly is a de novo hearing. People are entitled to present you with their information, their opinions, things that perhaps the planning board didn't hear. I suspect there are a lot of people here who weren't at the planning board meeting. But let me tell you what at least I believe the scope of your review is. The issue on appeal is simply whether the planning board, in denying the grant's application, was correct for the reasons set forth by the planning board. So they denied the application, and they denied it for a specific reason. We appealed that decision to the extent that others, Mr. Faderly, who submitted a memo, or anybody else want to talk about other things other than the planning board's sole basis for their decision, that's beyond the scope of this review. This review is limited to the planning board's decision on appeal, and we're the only party that filed an appeal. And we're appealing simply from the planning board's determination that evening. So it's not a hearing about activities across the street or anything of that nature. It is as follows. The planning board's decision from which we appeal simply reads, the development proposed in the application for permit does not meet the standards of the shoreline zoning ordinance in the following respects. Section 15, land use standards, large A, minimum lot standards, residential dwelling, commercial use. So it's the shoreline zoning ordinance that's in play here. The planning board didn't find that there was any other infirmity in our application, whether it be under the minimum lot size ordinance, the commercial development review ordinance, or other provisions of the shoreline zoning ordinance. And it's not tonight an opportunity for others to throw darts at other issues that maybe could have been brought up. They weren't. You're an appeals board. You're a de novo review, but you're reviewing the issues that are before you, and the only issue before you is the planning board's decision and the basis for it. Now, historically, and I may have to turn to the grants or to Mr. Dunbar occasionally when I go through this, but historically, there's been a dock at this location for more than 2 decades. Historically, the grants have had docks and have done the same type of use that they are doing this very day for at least the last 10 years. There was actually a boat launch once on this property years ago, and you can still see the remains of it. I don't know, do you still use that?
Yes, we do.
And they still use that. That was there when they bought the property back in the 90s. They never needed a permit from the town for the docks. I'm going to say that again. They never needed a permit for the docks. In this town, you don't need a permit, not even today. In fact, the code officer told Sean that a year or 2 ago. We don't regulate docks. We found that unusual. But I want to show you why that is. I've got some handouts. I didn't realize the size of the board, so I may have to ask at least a couple of members to share. I'm handing you, first of all, Chapter 1000 guidelines, which are DEP guidelines for municipal shoreline and zoning ordinances.
Actually, I think I can. Thank you.
All right. I do have an extra. Did I skip you, sir? That's fine. So I've given you that, and I'll come back to it in just a moment. The other thing I want to show you are just excerpts from your shoreline zoning ordinance, but I've highlighted them, and I know that you probably have that ordinance with you, but I've highlighted certain pages that I want to bring to your attention so we can decide just really what is the activity that's being regulated by your ordinance.
Thank you.
Yep. So, if you were to look at the first handout, the guidelines, you'll see things that are highlighted in yellow. So by reference, this is Chapter 1000 of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, entitled Guidelines for Municipal Shoreline Zoning Ordinances. And if you could turn to page 1, you'll see a big paragraph that's highlighted in yellow. Under the applicability section of a model ordinance or the guidelines for the ordinances, it lists the ordinance. It says this: the ordinance applies to all land areas within 250 horizontal feet distance of the fill in the blanks, normal high water line, upland edge of a coastal wetland, upland edge of a freshwater wetland. All of that's in your ordinance. Okay. What's not in your ordinance, and we've written here, and you can't quite see it, it says this is out. The town opted out. So when we look at the ordinance, you'll see that your ordinance does not apply to any structure built on, over, or abutting a dock, wharf, or pier, or other structure extending or located below the normal high water mark of a line of a water body or within the wetland. So when you look at your ordinance, you can follow along and you'll see them side by side. If you turn to your ordinance, the second handout that I gave you, and it'll be the third page. I guess at the top it says page 1. It's rather faint. Section 3, applicability. You'll see that your ordinance leaves out any reference to being applicable to structures built on, over, or abutting a dock, wharf, or pier, or other structure extending or located below the normal high water line or within a wetland. That's missing. You've opted, maybe it's a positive decision not to include those types of structures under your purview. And if you turn to page 31 of that little handout, that's a copy of your land use table from your shoreline zoning ordinance. You will see I'll find it in the guidelines for you in a moment. But the conforming, on page 31 of your ordinance, you will see under structures accessory to allowed uses.
Okay, so it's 14, page 14 in section 1000.
Page 14 in the bigger handout.
Goes from 13 to 15.
You're right, it does. Looks like it might have been. I'm going to have to opt for this copy if I can. It looks like I copied both pages. If you had this page, which we will put into the record, so I'm showing you it's the same handout that I gave you. It's the page entitled Land Use Tables in the Shoreland Zone. In the model ordinance, number 17, following structures accessory to allowed uses, number 17 is piers, docks, wharves, bridges, and other structures. That's not in your ordinance. Piers, docks, wharves, bridges, and other structures and uses extending over or below the normal high water line or within a wetland. That's not regulated in your ordinance. So this whole thing, the reason that we're here, it started because we have some docks, and we've had those docks out there for quite some time. At first, we were renting boats, and the boats were tied up there, and then we started simply renting slip spaces. There's really not much difference between those two activities, but we added a few more slips recently, and someone complained, because we've been doing the same thing for the last 10 years, someone complained that we were a commercial use and we weren't allowed to. Well, first of all, we are allowed under the shoreline zoning ordinance. It's a limited commercial district, so that type of use or that activity is certainly allowed in that zone. But your ordinance doesn't even regulate a dock. It doesn't regulate anything that is below the normal high water mark. And so to the extent that there are docks out there in the water, they're not regulated, and your code officer acknowledged that right off the bat, and I just need to try to confirm that with you here this evening, that those types of structures, and that use is not regulated under your shoreline zoning ordinance. And Andy, I'm gonna have to ask if we can put your copy of that in the record, because you have a complete copy. So, is there a person who, among the board members who's keeping the record? Okay, so would you mind, before the end of the meeting, doing that? I will. It has a complete regulatory scheme for piers, docks, wharves, and bridges on page 20. I don't know if that got copied by the young girl who's filling with my secretary or not. He did. All right. That's on page 20. Your ordinance, in the same section, you would find on page 41 that is completely missing. There's nothing about piers, docks, wharves, and bridges in that section of your ordinance. Again, an example of the fact that your ordinance simply doesn't regulate that activity. So, we're only concerned tonight with whether the planning board was correct, that we would have two principal uses on this lot. Well, to the extent that the docks are considered a use, they're not on the lot, and they're not regulated by your ordinance. So I'm hard pressed to think that there is a use, a new use being introduced to this lot. Furthermore, the use already existed prior to 2017, prior to the application being filed in 2018. I don't think that they needed to file an application at all. But having done so, we run into the conundrum that the parcel of land within the shoreland area that the docks are offshore from has a residence on it, and it's had a residence on it for decades. And that residence is owned by the Grants, and it's rented out, and it has been. And I think that they're attempting to be here tonight and may choose to address you concerning the activities that he's observed there in his time as a tenant, which I think is close to a decade or so. So the planning board found that there was one use, residence, and another use, commercial. And I'm not sure what that commercial activity would be, except for the incidental crossing of the property by people to get to their boats. And if you've been by the property, you probably have seen we have these two-wheeled wheelbarrows, and people put their gear in it. They trundle down to their boats. They load their boat for the weekend or the day or the evening, whatever they're doing, bring back the wheelbarrow, and they're off. That's the extent of the activity that's occurring there, and it's no different in kind than what has been occurring there for decades. The plan, which probably you have, and I'll ask Andy if you have that large one, put it up on the top here. I think that there's a reduced version of this in your application materials, but this plan shows you that residence that I speak of. It's right here. It's about 1,200 square feet. The parcel that we're talking about runs from here to here. The only other improvement on the property other than that building there is a cleared gravel area here that's actually part of the septic system. And Mr. Grant parks his pickup truck and plow there. And it could be used, we don't need to, but it could be used as a loading area, which is what it's called on this plan that was submitted, but we don't need to use it for that. And it already exists. It's not a new improvement. We haven't done this since filing the application. It's been there for a long, long time. And it can be removed if you wish. So what we have, and you've seen maybe in the newspaper recently, there have been stories about our operations, and I'm passing out these copies of articles only to demonstrate to you that this has been going on for a long time. There's one article here from, I'm just going to ask you to pass these down. I'm not sure how many copies we have of these. There's an article from 2014. Here's an article from 2010. Here's an article, and I'm not sure the date of it, but Mr. Grant looks like a much younger man in this picture. So I'm guessing it was at least 10 years ago. Those are articles which I offer to the board as evidence of the fact that these activities have been going on and that we're not introducing anything new on this lot by virtue of this application, which we were told we needed to file, which we were told we needed to file, and which I question now whether we even had to do that. So the planning board's denial was premised on the notion that we had two principal uses going on here, a residence and a commercial use. The residence is there, there's no doubt. And the hang-up is that the planning board says, well, now you have two uses, a residential use and a commercial use. Well, I don't think that the activity that I described to you that's taking place on the lot really be described as a commercial activity. People are walking across the lot. That's all that's happening. The activity on the docks is not regulated under your shoreline zoning. Simply isn't. So we would question whether there are actually two uses. And I would suggest to you that if it is thought that there are two uses, then the use of people walking across the property, the use they're making of it, whether you call it commercial, whether you just call it open to the public to walk across, it's incidental, it's minor, it's not intrusive, it's not creating what you and I think, at least it's not creating what I think of as a second full principal use of that lot. If you conclude that there are two uses here, then we're prepared to agree that we will turn the residence into a commercial use. We'll make it some sort of a dock-related facility if that's going to resolve this issue. But I don't think that we need to do that. I don't think we have to go that far. We haven't simply introduced anything new to the equation that has existed for years. And I don't think that there's any issue here any bigger than what I've just described. I think it's a matter of your construction of the shoreline zoning ordinance, section 15 in particular, and the facts that we've described here, in determining whether or not the planning board made a mistake. Now, you're going to hear from others tonight. I assume that the protocol will be to hear from supporters and then opponents. That will be typical anyway. But you're going to hear from opponents. We've seen some of the filings that have been made. In particular, Mr. Federley has filed a memorandum with you. And he's suggesting that it's clear that we can't have a commercial activity on this lot. Well, that's absolutely wrong. It's zoned for commercial activity. It's limited commercial district in the shoreline zoning ordinance. He says that Mr. Grant installed docks that were the subject of this application, despite the application being denied. That's not correct. The docks have been there. And the only thing that we've been told is to remove them in the wintertime. But the docks have been there. They're not the subject of the application. They're not covered by the ordinances, so I think we've demonstrated to them. And in my humble opinion, the commercial development review ordinance is not applicable to this appeal because the planning board didn't find any fault with our application as it pertains to the commercial development review ordinance. Their only fault. Their only basis for denial was that we didn't meet the standard in 15, section 15 of the shoreline zoning ordinance. So, Mr. Federley and I do agree, as I've already acknowledged, this is a de novo review. You're entitled to hear from people who may have different points of view, who may want to offer different bits of evidence for you to consider. But you should limit your review, you should limit your deliberations to the decision of the planning board, which was that we failed to meet section 15 of the ordinance only. I've tried to suggest to you that we do meet section 15, and I've tried to suggest to you that if you conclude otherwise, that it would be most prudent for you to simply acknowledge that on the condition that we turn the residence into a commercial use, then we have one use on the property. But it's a grandfathered lot, been there for decades and decades. We've actually made it larger. We've picked up 2 other parcels, making it much larger than it was. So we are entitled to move forward with our current activities, and we hope that you would bless those tonight at the end of this hearing. And I'm going to ask Mr. Dunbar, who's much more familiar with the operations out there, if he has anything he wants to add, and we'll ask Sean if he'll let that add.
So, okay, Andy Dunbar from Thayer Engineering. I'm a professional land surveyor, and I've been working for the grants on fire phases in this project. And so this is a map that was prepared based on a Google Earth photo, satellite imagery, and one thing that Ed didn't mention is that once people unload their cars, there's a big parking area available to them out behind the shop at 21 Cleveland Road. So that just facilitates getting between their cars and their boats.
And you make your copies available to the board secretary.
I have a procedural question.
Yes.
According to you agree that this is a de novo hearing, and according to the MMA guide, it says that this means that the Board of Appeals steps into the shoes of the original decision maker and starts the review process from scratch, holding its own hearings, creating its own records, and making its own independent judgment of whether a project should be approved based on the evidence in the record which the Board of Appeals created. It sounds somewhat different than what you were suggesting.
I think that you are limited to whatever issues are brought to you on appeal.
Well, when it says it starts the review process from scratch.
I'm suggesting to you that it's the review process of the issues that are on appeal.
Well, appeal is, well, I guess I would look to Mike for guidance. It strikes me that we're not limited to just that one narrow section, that as a de novo review, our responsibility is to take a look at the application as was submitted to the town, whatever that was, to collect information about that. We may look to the planning board for information, but that we're not limited to just the document that they produce.
I'm not suggesting you're limited to the document. I'm suggesting that you're limited to whatever issues are brought to you on appeal.
Okay, I think it sounds good like we're sort of going in a circle here.
And the way I would interpret the review is that the entire application starts from scratch, actually, as the MMA manual said, which means all the criteria that need to be met for that application. They fail below. The de novo review is a brand new record, as you suggested.
Which means commercial development, but the ordinance is applicable in lot size, shoreline zoning, all those, because they're all ordinances authorized by the town.
Obviously, my position is different on that, and so you are certainly running this hearing is different than I would have anticipated. So I may ask you for some leniency and an opportunity, if necessary, to be able to come back to you with a full record of argument and detail, because we have a significant disagreement about the scope of your review. And we need to present the application or the appeal differently.
Do people who use the property, do people use this property to put their boats into the water? You said there's a ramp there. So they're using that property?
They're walking across that property.
No, but they actually launching boats there. Did I understand that?
You'd have to ask Mr. Grant.
There's a
I
ramp
launch boats there, my customers do not.
Okay, so boats are launched there.
That is correct, as they have been since I moved there 23 years.
No, that's fine, I'm just trying to understand what actually takes place down there. So boats are launched, that's part of your business, is to
That is correct.
to launch the boats, and your customers pay a fee.
The launch and the
Your
shorefront
services.
is why I asked to permit that property.
Okay, and I ask this just because I'm trying to understand the use of the land. So when we have the discussion about commercial, it strikes me that if they're using it for that purpose, to launch boats, that is part of Mr. Grant's business, that strikes me as a commercial use of that parcel.
And do you also rent kayaks and stand-up paddle boards?
And canoes,
And so where do people take possession of those? Are they on the dock or the shoreland?
right at my launch.
So they are on the property?
That is correct. Half dozen of the other.
They walk across, they do the business at 21.
Right, but
They walk
the
across.
vessels themselves, if I can use that term,
Are picked up there.
are stationed on the property,
That is
not
correct.
on the dock.
That is correct.
I'm confused, so they're on land. and-
As I have done
That's what I'm
since
saying.
2008.
May I ask a question? I look for this answer. Which of the lots, 33 and 34, which is 21 and which is 24?
21 is on the opposite side of the street.
Is it, it's
So you got
58?
Eves on one side, odds on the other.
Yeah, 58 is, okay. 58 is 21?
Lot,
57 or 58?
57
On
and
the north
58 on the tax map are part of 21.
They're 21. Okay,
This,
and
this is 24 here,
that's all
and it's made up
24.
of 33 and 34.
Thank you.
33
But one of
here,
those lots is
34 of
on
these
21.
together. Tax map, lot numbers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, question, I'd like to confirm that the lot in question is rented or leased
It is,
to another party
that is correct.
in its totality.
The house.
The house, yes,
The land is not,
it is not.
so that renter or leaser cannot park there,
He
cannot,
can park in the driveway beside the house. The parking that has been designated for unloading and loading for our customers is not where he parks.
can they conduct recreational activities on the lot?
And the tenant, certainly.
Yes.
He has his own slip in front of his house, a dock that he has 2 boats on himself.
He can use any part of the lot for any residential.
He's my closest friend. He can do whatever he wants.
So, in other words, that lot has been provided to a tenant. Presumably, there is some agreement as to what that tenant's rights and uses of that lot are. And that would
Absolutely,
imply,
and we're good friends.
and that would imply that you would have given up some rights or uses in order for that to take place. Is that correct?
No. I use that land freely. As a matter of fact, my kayaks, sups, and sailboat are parked right in front of his unit.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask another question, please? I had a lot of trouble understanding that nobody needs to approve docks on the water. So I looked in the the main state law. And all I could find was that you don't need approval to replace docks. It doesn't say that you do to enlarge or expand the dock business, but it does say that you don't need a permit or permission from the
Put a
state
dock in.
to replace an existing dock. And these little docks here that say removed are presumed were original docks, right?
No, I've probably had 4 sets of docks in the 23 years I've lived there.
Well, these don't, this shows a few docks in front of the Dosty lot, right? And then the new configuration is beyond that, right? It's not actually replacing these, it's different.
Maybe I need to get over here.
And I guess my question is, did you seek or have to seek approval to put the first one of these new docks in the water?
I got the same response when I asked then as I did many, many years later. The Belgrade does not regulate docks.
Did you
And
ask
so
the
we
state?
built docks.
Did you ask the state?
I
Pardon?
actually.
No, I
did,
asked our CEO.
But I actually did call DEP, I walked through there. They have a grid of what to do for new anything, called DEP, natural resources. We're all referred back, there's no regulation to add the new docks unless there's a regulation from the local municipality. And we called the local municipality and they said, go ahead.
Thank you.
So Ms. Blazer,
The docks at Great Pond Marina put in. They got docks
are
at
we
the yin yang.
clear that my point with you earlier was that your ordinance specifically excised, removed docks from the review criteria in your order?
I understood that. I did understand that. My question though was, if the docks aren't there legally, I'm not saying they are, or I'm not saying they're illegal, but if they're not there legally, then why are we worried about parking or access? Because first things first, I wanted to make sure that these docks were okay.
It is completely our understanding that they are legal. We asked permission for all the docks we have built. And again, I've probably built 4 different sets over the years. I'm a boat junkie. Right now, I probably own 20 some odd boats. I've always had big dock systems, and because of that big dock system is how we got to renting slips. A friend of mine that had on Main Street that had no water access asked. I rented them. But we were renting slips there already. I mean, renting boats off there already. And if you look up the DEP's definitions of boatyards, marinas, there's no differential. We were already operating under that criteria by renting boats there. We've had a sign at the end of that street 6 months out of the year for the last 10 years. And I can't imagine how anyone in this little tiny village of 2,000-3,000 people ever missed that sign.
Did you have to seek approval to get the initial renting business started 10 years
Get the what
ago?
now?
I'm sorry, I have a frog in my throat.
Sure.
Did you have to seek the town's approval to get that business started?
In 2008, I was
Renting.
granted a permit, and it was my understanding that Sean Grant, and his property was being permitted. That was my understanding. I would not have advertised boats for rent. I would not have put a sign at the end of the street, boats for rent, and then eventually slips for rent and boats for rent, had I thought I was doing something that was beyond the scope of what I
don't
was
doubt that, Sean.
permitted.
I don't doubt that at all. But what was your permit for?
Home, boat repairs, et cetera, et cetera.
What-
I can't remember the exact words on the boat repairs, restoration.
Rental?
And then there was some asked about, no, rental was not mentioned.
Okay.
It was not.
But I would add that the rental piece was always and still is a smaller piece of it.
I'm
You know,
sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's a smaller piece. The primary book of business is boat restoration and repair. And according to all of the research that we did, the boat rentals would be an ancillary service to that book of business. If you look at all the definitions, all of those things fall under the same category of business. And it wouldn't be deemed a change of use.
Thank you.
I got one piece of information toward on this inquiry. When I became involved in this, I sent an email to Lucian Langley at Maine DEP and asked him, you know, if there were any state permits that needed to be acquired for what was going on here. And regarding the docks, he said, north of the Hewlin Road, Sean's dock system is not regulated by my bureau so long as the structures are temporary and not permanent. And he goes on to find that it's not being in place for more than 7 months in a 12-month period.
What's the date on that?
We have that email.
Yeah.
January 8th, 2018.
Thank you.
John, when you were granted the home occupation permit back in 2008,
Excuse me, I'm doing my back today. May 2008.
was it your understanding that the home occupation was limited to the south side
None
of the
whatsoever.
road?
The reason it made sense to try to permit my property was I had shorefront, I had docks. You know, a boat business where you can't test, launch.
You answered my question, thank you.
Andy, for the record, could you please confirm the lot size for us, shore frontage,
Okay, I think
for the record?
25,000 square feet.
Okay.
I believe.
How many feet are on the water?
Just over 200.
Over 200?
Yeah.
Okay. And
And that's when you combine all 3 lots together and do the straight line end to end.
so 25,
25,000 square feet.
Mr. Woodall.
road, and the road frontage would be,
Is it 170?
24 more or less. 224.
224.
More or less. Yep.
So, or as Ed said, I think it would make sense if there are other people who are going to offer things in support, it would generally make sense. You might want to suggest that it be confined to the issues in the ordinance, I think that suggested. A lot of people are going to talk, but I think it should be limited to what the criteria are in the ordinance, you know, a little bit.
and how many people roughly would like to speak in favor of?
What's that?
In favor of?
In favor of, would you like to speak? In favor of, would you like to speak?
Yeah, gotta speak up, can't hear you back here.
Sorry. Speak, yeah.
I don't know, limited to like 2 minutes or.
Yeah, I think at some point you can limit it to if things are repetitive. If things become repetitive, the board can speed it up if people don't have anything new to offer, but I think the other thing is the board would just encourage you to direct comments to the ordinance itself, as opposed to criteria that maybe are not in the ordinance.
It would also be helpful if we get the name
Yeah,
of
as I said,
whoever
they might-
speaking, so we can, just for the record, so we can make sure the minutes.
Matter of fact, you might want to come up, is that the only microphone that's going to be word, so people probably have to come up.
Does everybody understand that? So if you'd like to speak, come up to the mic and introduce yourself, please, for the record. Who'd like to be first?
My name is Joan McGill. I own the property and live next door to Sean and his family and the business. And I personally think it's terrific. When my children were younger, there was a beach down there, and they used to go down there swimming. Well, obviously, they don't go down there swimming anymore. You never see a kid on the street. They're home playing video games. So what he is doing, he is creating a business that is beneficial
to this town. My father-in-law established and built what is now the Village Inn, but to me, it will always be the Locust House, which he introduced it as. And many of you may not like what I have to say, and I apologize for it. But he was the first one in the town of Belgrade that accepted Jewish people into his hotel. And I'm proud of that because my Lord and Savior was a Jew. Now, the Village Inn is no more like the Locust House was than I am when I worked in that Locust House 40 or 50 years ago.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Bellavance. I moved up in Belgrade Lakes when I was just 21 years old. And I've seen a lot of changes in there. And boy, does it look good now. I mean, Sean improved that. Because we used to live down the street from there, and it was an old house. There was nothing but junk in there. And he really improved it, 100%. And he's doing a great job doing that. And I appreciate him doing that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Craig Alexander. I was born and raised in Belgrade. Lived here all my life. I'm a member of the planning board. I'm also on the dam committee and the vice president of Rome Rough Riders. I've also been here in business in Belgrade for 22 years. I'm the one living in the house. I have a 10-year history watching this business grow. And yes, it has grown, but it's still doing the same thing that 10 years ago it was doing. Hasn't been a secret. Been watching the signs. I watch people run boats, watch people do all that stuff on this property. Signs have been out at the end of the streets for years. Brightside used to host the antique boat show. I don't know if all you guys, I'm sure a lot of you have been to the antique boat show. Right on this same piece of property that's in question now. All that's been very public and very transparent. They've worked very hard to grow the business. For you that were here 20 years ago, and we've heard mention of it already, he's really cleaned the area up. The business is good for the town, good for the local economy. It is in the town's general development plan. I know that code enforcement has been there and consulted numerous times along the way, including before the docks were expanded. There were no issues until last year, shortly after new commercial ordinance was approved. And mind you, how many people voted on this commercial ordinance? Either way, it's approved. 250 something of people voted on this ordinance. The new docks have been there for 3 years. If there was an ordinance violation, it should have been addressed years ago, before the new docks were put in. I mean, telling someone they can do it is causing a hardship. Who's causing the hardship? When all the court enforcement's been there. He's asked the right people along the way. Who's causing the hardship? Why didn't anybody say no along the way? To ask a business has been operating for 10 years to apply for a new business permit under the new application ordinance is unreasonable and wrong, especially after they've made such an investment. in my opinion, the real issue is the town does not have a dock ordinance and is trying to find a way to enforce one. Even if you set aside the fairness of this situation, losing the ability to use the docks would be a huge financial blow to this business and family. The appeals board should grant this variance and allow the business to continue to contribute to this community.
This is not a variance hearing, right? This is a de novo review.
It's not a variance hearing.
Yeah, so, our responsibility is not with regard to Mr. Grant or good person, that's not at all in question.
So why is this variance of a year and a half ago being applied?
No, so let me just finish, if I may please. Well, our responsibility here is we've been given an application and asked to act upon that application. We're not people to enforce ordinances. Our responsibility is to take a look at the ordinances that were adopted by the voters and to see how they align with the application.
But who brought in the complaint?
We're not gonna get into I'm just trying to clarify what the process is that we're going through here. It's not a variance hearing, it's a de novo hearing, and we have the opportunity to just take a look at the application on the facts. It's not a subjective thing, it's an objective thing. So, does the application fit within the ordinances? It's really that simple.
But who started this? Somebody had to make a complaint.
Sir, all I can tell you is our purpose is here. We're trying to
Now somebody had to come to you people to make something up.
The person that came to us was Mr. Grant.
Who came to you?
Mr. Grant.
All right.
Mr. Grant came to us.
No, he didn't make the complaint. Somebody before him set this up.
You asked me a question, let me answer the question. The question was, who came to us? Why are we here? We are here because Mr. Grant submitted an application to the appeals board to conduct a de novo hearing. That's why we're here. That's the only reason that we're here. And that's what we're doing. But as we go through the process, I think it's helpful just to sort of set the record straight so that we understand what we're doing here. We're not here to talk about variances because that's not on the table. We are here to talk about the application itself as it applies to the ordinances that have been approved by the voters in the town. That's really why we're here.
Yeah, and I think the other point is, as much as people want to comment on that it may be good business, helpful business, that's not a standard that the board is reviewing in the ordinance. The only thing that this board can review is the actual application of the facts to the ordinance. And one of the standards is not whether people think it's a popular business. So to the extent those are the comments, I think people have to move through those.
Thank you. I'm not sure that my remarks are appropriate now based on all the nuances we have here. My name's Dan Mchenry, and I'm a part-time resident of Hoyt Island. And we're here from May until about the end of September or so. And I just want to say thank goodness for Great Pond Marina. Thank goodness for Brightside Marina. And I wish that there was at least one more marina on this lake, because we need that competition and we need that service that both of these marinas now provide. Okay, they do a great job, and I really do appreciate them both being there, but we need these services. And the other thing that I look at is I love history. And I look back at the history of this great town, and there's always been some sort of commercial activity along that stream. And this marina continues that long-standing history. And to do anything which stops anybody in this town from earning a living and having an honest wage is just awful. And I am in great favor of not just having one marina in this town, but having more than two. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is George Hoy. Been here 58 years in this town. I knew this town when they had Great Pond Marina, when Dave West owned it. They had Dave's Marina there where the post office is now. They were the real estate businesses there, Lakeshore, they had boats selling down there. That stream was busy all the time. And now they're talking about trying to do away with one. I think competition is the best thing in the world. And I pray to God that that man can stay in business, because I know what he did for me. When I lost my son a long time, and I had to take the boat to get a service for the winter, Mr. Grant brought the boat back to my house. I asked him what I owed him. He said, it's on me. That's how good a man he is. How you feel now? I'm out of here.
Jerry Motion, 32 Red Oaks, Lodge Road. I'm affected by this new dock system that he's put in. He asked me how I feel about it when, after it was installed. And I have plenty of room. It's a beautiful system. I mean, if you folks would take a drive down and take a walk out on this, it's a first-class system. The people that I've run into that are renting these docks are very friendly. I'm right beside them. I got a deeded access to a thing. I'm not 15 feet away from. I have plenty of room for my boat. That was a concern. The type of guy this guy is, I see how he treats his help. I've dropped his name at other marinas up northern New Hampshire. I'm from New Hampshire. And everyone knows this fella right here. They know the great work he does on these old boats that he reconditions. The people he uses, the businesses locally he uses. You can't afford to shut a gentleman down like this. You should stand behind your small businesses so they get big. We shouldn't get into a legal battle over whether a lot is big enough. Go down and take a look at what he's actually doing down there.
Thank you.
You the mic prepared?
Jason Cook, 13th generation in Belgrade. I've been working with Sean since 2009. We've been doing the same shit. And I wouldn't work for anybody else in this town.
My name is Andy Gurman. I'm new to Belgrade. I'm a Hoyt resident. Very lucky to have a piece out there. Really excited about it. I have my boat at Sean's Marina at Brightside. I like to ditto what you said, sir. I don't know what we do. There's no slips available. What do I do? Where do I keep my boat? The slips just are not available. And it's already been said what a great steward he is of that property. I'm not sure where you go. I hear what you're saying. You put it in black and white. There's more than just black and white. There's a whole lot of gray area here. And what we're telling you is that gray area. That there's more than just black and white. So you need to be looking at that. That's why we're up here. People are talking to you now and making these comments. So
thank you, sir.
I'll just say a couple words. Go ahead.
Alan Bailey, my wife Elizabeth back there. We've been coming to Belgrade for over 25 years. We normally rent a place. We have 5 kids. When the last one got ready to graduate from high school, we came up here, or was in high school actually, and we wanted to live in the village because we thought, if we were going to come here for a couple of months, maybe the woods is okay, but we decided that, the village was where we wanted to be if we're going to spend, maybe 4 months, 5 months, 6 months a year. Anyway, so we bought Betty Grant's old house. I don't know, a lot of people you might know Betty Grant, but I never met her, but I heard she's a wonderful old lady and everybody knew her. And so we bought that house, and right before we put an offer on it, we kind of scouted around, and we've had, my wife's owned since she was like 20, a lot on Hoyt's Island. But we had 5 kids, so we never, could afford to go build something on the island just for, a month in the summer. So we thought, well, geez, if we get a little house in the village and put a dock on the Hoyt's Island, that would be our waterfront. So I approached Sean, and this is probably over 5 years ago, and said, hey, Sean, can you rent me a slip? And he said, sure, we rent slips. And I said, okay, great. So I was one of his first customers, and that gave me the ability to get to the island, and it's probably one of the reasons I bought the house. So I just wanted to say that Sean's always been fair to me and provides really good service, and I'm really happy that he's there. I don't know what I'd do without it. Thank you.
Any more people would like to speak? We could keep them to a...
So good evening, my name is Josh Mchenry. I am Dan Mchenry's son, so also kind of a weekend resident at Hoyt Island. And I just wanted to ask, I'm not expecting answers really because I know you're just taking comment, but I'm not entirely clear on what propagated the original application back in February, because I was trying to prepare for this hearing. I asked the town for some documents. I wasn't able to get my hands on the planning board's original findings of fact. You're essentially, since this is de novo, you're throwing that out anyway. But from what I've heard so far tonight on a fact basis, I'm not hearing a new principal use. I used to sit on planning board in New Gloucester for 5 years. And nothing has substantively changed other than the addition or the growth of some docks, right? So it was already a commercial use. It was already, on the waterfront with the boat rentals. I'm not hearing anything to me that is saying this is a brand new principal use. So I think that, or I hope that this board thinks about that question kind of right up front is, is this application even valid, or is it even required? Because I'm not hearing a new principal use. There's been a growth and an accessory use. I certainly would grant that, but I haven't heard any new principal use today. The only other thing I would say is, as a Hoyt resident, I hope we're part-time resident. I hope it's just clear that the 2 marinas are really important to us, and or the two docking facilities are really important to us, and we wouldn't have a way to get to the island and enjoy our summer house without it. So we really appreciate that, and I know it's not easy to spend your night here, so thanks for that too.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mimi Parks. I've been coming here in the summertime since I was 19. Fortunate enough to marry into a great big old family who was interested in water and told me about this place, and I wish I could live here full time. I'm very envious of you gentlemen in the camouflage hat. I wish I could be here all the time. And I want to tell you, this gentleman is incredible. His work is stellar. He is so professional. And I have done that walk. If you want to know about it, I'll tell you all about it. These feet have walked over that grass, done the exchange, jumped in my boat. He makes it so easy. And please, I hope you take another look at everything that he has put in application-wise, because this guy deserves to stay. Thank you.
You gotta be fast. My name's Don Pigeon. I live in Florida, and I come up here the middle of June, and I stay until my wife says it's too cold, which is usually the middle of September. I'd like to add one thing about Brightside Marina. I mean, everything that's been said, I couldn't agree more with. But when it comes to parking a vehicle, I don't have to leave it on the highway. I don't have to leave it on a side road. It's in its own parking lot. A parking lot is provided. And that's something that not everyone has.
Yeah.
I would hate to lose that. If we lost the marina, I don't know what I'd do either. Well, thank you.
I'm sorry, we're out of time. Thank you, Jay.
My name's Tom Stresnevsky. I've lived here for, I guess about 25 years. And I've been on the budget committee and the road committee. I was head of the budget committee for a year. I don't know this gentleman at all. Never met him. I don't have a boat in his slipper on his Marina. But it seems to me that the town of Belgrade has approved the current use of this land for over a decade. They've taken his taxes. They haven't complained. He's changed his docks, which it seems from the argument that Belgrade can't regulate anyway. We have no jurisdiction. So he hasn't changed anything he's been doing in the last 10 years. There's a new commercial ordinance. Well, his existing business should be grandfathered under the old one. Otherwise, why isn't the Village Inn and the Sunset Grill and Christie's and everybody else having to apply under the new ordinance? Why isn't every little comma and period on their businesses being reviewed? And what we're down to, did he have to apply for a new permit, new business permit? It doesn't sound that way. Does the town have any jurisdiction over the docks? Doesn't sound that way. Has the use of the parcel changed at all in the last 10 years, 20 years? It doesn't sound that way. So why are we here? It seems like he's doing everything he should be doing. There's no new use. All reports are he runs a clean business. There's no junk. He's not cheating people. People are happy with what he's done. The other thing that strikes me about this is starting in at least 2008, he and his wife have asked the town repeatedly, is this okay? They've gone to the DEP. They've talked to state agencies. Yes, this is okay. Yes, this is okay. Yes, this is okay. They always get the same answer. So it's not like you have somebody fly by night, somebody who's always bending the rules and twisting things. These people have done their homework. And since the use doesn't seem to have changed, I think that the application should be granted, or really, the new application should just be scuppered. Do away with it. He's had the business for 10 years. He's not doing anything new, and let's all move on. Thank you.
I'm Ron Bellavance. I own a construction company, Sean's neighbor as well. And we have no issues with what he's doing there. We're his closest neighbors. I've put a lot of docks in this lake. Never got a permit for any one of them I've ever put in. I don't know what else you need.
Can we again find out how many more people? How many more are there? Just how many more people want to speak in favor? Because we want to just. No. You only get one shot at this apple.
I'm Rebecca Dossie. I've lived here for 40 years, and I've been going up and down that stream the entire 40 years of my life. I've never seen any amount of traffic change. 2 weeks ago, I sat down there and watched more traffic go to the farmer's market than I did go up and down to go to Sean's and use the docks. We've been very fortunate to be able to pull in there and walk to the store and spend money at all the different businesses downtown, and it's very fortunate to be able to pull in, and you can pull into any one of those docks just the same at Day's store, at the post office, at Sean's, to be able to spend money in the town of Belgrade. I don't feel that the traffic has changed one bit.
My name is Maria Bryan. I have been coming up here for 65 years. My dad bought the Phillips camp at the end of the stream when I was 10 years old, and I've seen a lot of changes. I come up every summer of my life, and I can only say it's much nicer going down Hewlin Road now, since you have put your wonderful business in there, than it ever was before. I remember when it was Skunk Alley, and I'm telling you, it was not nice to go down that road then. I was embarrassed to have people come and visit us. I said, we're in a little log cabin at the end of the stream, but I thought, oh, They've got to go down Skunk Alley to get to us. But you know what? I say this is a wonderful thing for Belgrade Lakes, and it's a wonderful thing for Hewlin Road. At first, I thought maybe it was just going to be, you know, so much more traffic coming in and going down to our little camp at the end of the road, but it's not. And it's just a wonderful thing, so I'm happy for it.
John Stevens, everyone, and I have a harder time speaking in public than I do seeing through all this red tape, but just hear everyone's tales of what they get from this place and what it means to me. I mean, I spend almost every day of my life at this place, and to see it going through this is really hard for me. And if you guys are taking more of these stories and not just seeing it as tax math.
My name is Haley Heminger. That was my fiance. He's truly been changed by Sean Grant. I have also crossed this road many times if I ever felt unsafe. It was my own fault, absolutely not the business at all. As for the kayaks, canoes, stand-up paddleboards, I've used them many times. Never had any issues at all. I almost feel like if there is an issue with where they're placed and that the docks would be better, then I would feel unsafe.
Thank you. Can you just how many employees do you have?
2.
Okay. So she's just wearing the shirt so she's
Fiance, yeah. I got customers that wear them too. I got people in the room that wanted to wear them, but I was out of fresh ones.
I'm Mark Berry. Known Sean for years. He's a good guy. Everything that people have said about him is true. And I came here because I was kind of curious what was going on. I wrote a letter of recommendation to Mike and sent it in, and I wasn't going to say anything, but Sean's always done everything by the book, and he's always tried to do things the right way. And he came to you guys for a permit just to make sure that everything was copacetic. And it seems like the proper thing to have done would have been your grandfather, you're good to go. He came because of a concern, and now he's being penalized for it. Now, we've got the new ordinance, but is everybody else on that lake going to be expected to put in a new application and be judged by the new rules? I mean, basically, he tried to do everything by the book, and he's getting stepped on for it. And there are a number of other businesses on that lake that if they came in and gave you a permit, you're going to do the same thing to them. That's all.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? We all set? Okay, thank you everyone for your comments. Appreciate it.
People speaking in opposition. Was that? Yeah, that was the people that were speaking in favor.
Yes, correct.
Now, if there's folks who want to speak in opposition, this is their opportunity.
Okay, Tom?
Okay, thank you. My name is Tom Faderly, and I was brought into this matter by Great Pond Marina, who doesn't disagree with the arguments that have been stated that the lake would benefit from multiple marinas. Their only position is that everybody play by the same set of rules. There is not just the commercial development review ordinance at issue that's new. There is the shoreline zoning ordinance and the minimum lot size ordinance. And it's an unfortunate fact that Mr. Grant's operations don't conform with those ordinances. I submitted a memorandum to this board on May 15. I'd just like to reference that so that it's in the record. And it enumerated the various ways that this lot that we're talking about, that's the subject of the application, and you've heard it again tonight, is 25,000 square feet. And however you look at it, and all the good people who've gotten up and spoken to you have acknowledged It's part of his operation. It's part of his commercial marina operation. If you look at Mr. Grant's website, he doesn't hide the fact that he's running a great little marina, but he's not permitted to run a marina. And what he's doing on this lot, lot 24, is commercial activity. And your ordinances are very clear that in order to have commercial activity, you need 40,000 square feet of land. And he doesn't have it on this lot. That's his fundamental problem. And it's a problem that, despite all of this good testimony you've heard tonight, this testimony is really urging you all to change the law, which of course you as the Board of Appeals don't have any authority to do. You're in the unenviable position of having to apply the law. And unfortunately for Mr. Grant, the law doesn't favor him here. Despite what everybody's saying, I have no reason to doubt that he's a great person and that the marina is good for the town. But he's applied and he doesn't meet the requirements. I would like to go back to the beginning with Mr. Bearer's arguments. And I appreciate Mr. Bradshaw referring to the Maine Municipal Association guidelines on what is a de novo review. It is nothing like what Mr. Bearer suggested it was, and that you have to put on blinders and just look at this skinny little issue that they failed on, and let's not consider what's really going on the lot. That's not the way it works. It's just the way the MMA manual states it, which is really well-established law in the state of Maine, that in a de novo setting, you are now stepping into the shoes of the planning board, and you have to find affirmatively on all of the findings that are required under the shoreland zoning ordinance, under the commercial development review ordinance, and under the minimum lot size ordinance, that this operation complies with those. The planning board couldn't find that, and instead denied it. And they denied it principally on the basis that you're running a commercial operation on a lot that just doesn't allow for it. I don't think there's any way around that fact. This notion that docks are out of your jurisdiction, I think is a red herring. Even if you want to accept the argument that your ordinances don't allow you to regulate a dock, these docks are attached to the land, and this is the shoreland in your shoreland zoning. And your ordinances are very clear that you regulate commercial activity in the shoreland zone. And if you're going to allow commercial activity in the shoreland zone, it needs to be on a lot that's 40,000 square feet. So these docks aren't detached from the shoreland, which you have jurisdiction over. Of course, because there's also a residence there, that's supposed to be another, I think I've been misspeaking. I think it's actually 60,000 square feet that you need for the commercial, and it's another 40 for the residence. So you really need 100,000 square feet. Now, people might not like that, but you don't have the power to say, well, we're going to here tonight change the rules because this is a great business. That's just not the way it is. And you don't have that authority.
2 minutes.
So, you know, and that it is commercial activity on this lot. I would say Mr. Grant answered that for you tonight. One of the first questions that I believe Mrs. Blazer put to him was, well, how are people getting their canoes and kayaks into the water? And, you know, where do they go pay? And he said, well, it's, you know, they come over here to pay on 21 Hoolan Road, and they launch over on 24, and it's 6 1/2 dozen. It's an integrated marina operation, and maybe that's a good thing from everybody's perspective. But it's a commercial activity. This is for commercial enterprise. These aren't just his friends doing this. He's not doing this for free. It's a commercial activity. The lot doesn't work. If people think there needs to be another marina on the lake, your ordinances don't preclude that, but they preclude it on a lot that's 25,000 square feet. You know, there's been a lot of suggestion that, you know, it's been this way for a while and therefore it's okay. That doesn't work that way either. This has grown, and Mr. Grant should be applauded for growing his business, but unfortunately he's growing it in an area that's not allowed. It's now become apparent to the town that he's operating commercial activity on this lot. He came forward with an application. You now review the application against the ordinances, and there's no argument for grandfathering. He doesn't have rights under that when the ordinance, the shoreland zoning ordinance has been in place. It has minimum lot size requirements. The minimum lot size ordinance has been in place. It has minimum lot size requirements. There's also been this argument that it's just accessory use. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's principal use on 24 Houlihan or accessory use. What matters is it commercial use or not? And if it's commercial use, then those requirements are all triggered. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to answer them later if this goes on and you want to pose questions. But I think you're stuck with enforcing the ordinances that are in place. Maybe I am the jerk for saying as much, but I think it's the law. It's what you're obligated to apply. And you know, maybe there are other avenues for Mr. Grant, but it's not getting you to overturn a decision from the planning board when the planning board did what your ordinances told it to do. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, we did receive your memorandum dated May 15th, 2018. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Bob?
My name's Bob Gardner, and I own and operate Great Pond Marina. I followed this, and I've known Sean for the last 10 years. He was a customer of mine. I sent him mini customers. I've sent him dock customers. He's come down and he's bought parts from me, and I've always discounted them. Always had cordial conversations with him at the gas dock. So I'm not really upset with Sean. I agree with all the nice comments that were made to him. I'm more upset with the people representing Sean. I've been following this. I thought Sean had a permit for a marina. I really did. I did not think that the town of Belgrade would permit the docks going in without saying he's a marina. Sean started out with a home occupation application back in 2008. And I have copies of it here, but they were never shown to the planning board. They were never shown to the code enforcement officer, never dug them out, and the town manager did not even know it. Before application, I had the permit, the application signed by Sean, and then in Sean's handwriting, exactly what this home occupation represented. It says business type. This is in Sean's writing right here. Boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing. Hours of operation 8 to 4 daily. Belgrade Boat Services. So he became Brightside Wooden Boat Services. Lo and behold, a couple years ago, changed the logo. Now he's Brightside Marina. So he's a brand new company. Why didn't he go to the planning board and apply for being a marina? It would have been that simple. Saying, I know I don't have enough land, but I have the establishment, and ask for a variance to put a marina in there. Wouldn't that make sense? I would be in favor of that. But what has happened is everybody is telling the half-truths. They're not saying, we started out with a basic business, and this entrepreneur grew it beyond its bounds, So why don't we just be straight and honest? It's funny that Andy Dunbar shows this overhead. These are inserted. Why doesn't he show the most current one, which I pulled off of Bing? Why is not that in there? Because it would show that Sean has put all the storage boats on this lot. Be honest. If you just want to transgress this to your docks, don't put your storage boats on the lot. He owns 15 acres. He bought the health center. Use that property. So my customers come down looking for a very beautiful setting. They come down the stream and they see a bunch of shrink wrap boats next to the shore. So let's be honest. The next thing they said is we only use it to hand carry. Does that look like, that's the lot. Does that look like things are hand carried?
Wait a second.
Hey.
Wait. You're not talking to the audience.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're talking.
Sorry.
A lot of people talk.
Does that look like that's hand carried? Here is a crane, and you can see the erosion. You may have that.
What about the erosion at your marina?
That's what's degrading the quality of our water quality, allowing this to happen.
I've checked out my shore more than once and I have no problem with it.
This was a photograph that I have taken in May. You can see all the shrink wrap boats, where they say there is nothing commercial about that property. Here's another set of pictures, all off the internet, showing the operation on that property, commercial operation. Now, this has not been going on for the last 10 years. Here is Streetscape Google, 2011. You can see how pristine that property is. Do you see any landing in there?
Sure, it's right there, Bob.
So, why don't we just tell the facts like they are? Then, this was last year. He was denied by the planning board. These docks are new this year. And this
Can I interrupt one second on that?
No, let him finish.
Okay.
And this is the type of docks, this is the kind of boats that they're bringing into this lake. And finally, the last photograph is they were saying that for the last 10 years, he's had 4 sets of docks for all his, these are Sean's wooden boats. This is what that property used to look like.
Should be ashamed of yourself.
So all I'm asking is that people present the facts, not half-truths. Tell it like it is and let the chips fall where they are. Thank you.
Sorry. I have a question, just to be clear. Did you submit, you were referring to a permit application. Did you submit that earlier?
Yes.
Okay, and does the board have that?
I don't have it.
You don't have it in the board copy?
It's in the bulletin, it's in this.
I was just pointing that out.
Okay, and Mr. Guy, I just wanted to be clear because there's been some discussion about that. Which property did that relate to, 21 or 24?
24, across the road, the home occupation.
The home, which is actually 21.
Which would be on the south side.
Right, not on the water side.
Not on the water
That's
side.
the easiest way. Okay, that's
Right.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
So the board has that.
So do you have questions?
Well, I do. I just want to see this boat that seems to disturb Bob, a man in the boat business, being shook up about boats. Got me interested.
John,
John.
He can, hold on just a second, he can look at it. No, I mean, he can't ask questions, you want to look at that?
Yeah, I just saw the boat. It's a 26-foot boat, big deal. The pontoon boat's on this lake easily 4 feet longer than that boat.
So, anyone else want to speak?
It seems to me after Mr. Gardner talked.
He's already hit, in opposition.
Oh.
We're not going to go back around again. And the applicant then gets a chance to respond to anything that they've heard and ask questions, so. Yeah. So, okay, no more opposition.
Any more?
Then the
Tom, you done?
applicant gets one more shot, not everybody in the room, but Andy.
Thank you, and what I would like to start with is to give Sean an opportunity to look at those photographs and offer his comments on what he thinks those depict, whether they're one day in time, whether that's typical of the property and the things that Mr. Gardner presented them for. So Sean, you get started over to look at those. Would you want to go over?
Oh, I'd be happy to, yeah. Well, again, this one is a 26-foot boat. That's a lake. I'm not sure where that becomes a problem. Mr. Gardner stated there's no launch there.
Sorry.
It's right there.
And only to help you out, you probably want to show the folks here.
Oh, sure.
As opposed to.
We're the ones
that
are. This is the launch.
Or you can stand and hold them up there.
Sure. This is the launch. It was there when I bought the property 23 years ago. Sure. There's that little recess in the shore right there. And yes, there is a crane removing my docks because we found that to be probably the most environmentally friendly way to do it. These docks weigh between 8 and 1,000 pounds per section. They're well-built docks. They're not junk. As far as erosion, sorry, I don't see it here. These rocks, that's the high water mark. The lake was down 3 feet. That's not erosion, those are rocks. Anyway, and yes, those are some beautiful wooden boats, and I do bring a lot of them to this town. Bob, you know, you mentioned my growth. You know, I don't believe that a restaurant is exactly the exact same thing as renting boats or slips. Did you get permitted to do that?
Point of order, just
good.
The discussion is supposed to be with us.
All right, sorry, but it was just, he wants to talk half-truths, well, he did a whole bunch of them.
Sunset Grill, anything you want.
Sure. Anyway, I've explained those pictures. That was, you know, pretty much a waste of everybody's time.
Can I say something? I'm nobody can ever hear me. I'm Samantha Grant, I'm Sean's wife, and as Mr. Gardner pointed out, yes, there has been activity, but all along, we have communicated with the town, we've communicated with the CEO. We were under the understanding, and I believe that members of the town were too, that our business included all of the properties, not just one lot, not just. And I think that we've consulted with everybody that we can consult with, and there is no new use. We've grown the use. We told the planning board we don't have to leave boats there. We don't have to leave kayaks there. At your discretion. We're willing to change the use of the residents there to be commercial. But it would be a huge, we've invested so heavily in these docks with what we thought was the right permissions, that it would be a huge financial blow to our family and our business to have that stop. We would have no recourse to get a return on that investment. I realize this is outside of the scope of the ordinance, but we've personally taken out a personal loan, we've taken out mortgages, and I've cashed in retirement to try to make a go of this business. And we have connected with everybody along the way, and we have tried to do what is right. We had one legal counsel say you don't need to apply for a permit, but we wanted to do the right thing and be right with the town. And to go through this has just been terrible. And I don't know if it would be a blow that we could survive, and that seems to be the intent of some. But this is, the reality is we've been doing this, and we've been doing it above board. We've been doing it with what we thought was the right town permits, and it seems like the rules have been reinterpreted along the way, because we never once received any complaints, any notices from the town, any notices of violations, or any phone calls until last spring, and the docks had been in the water. So there was some impetus to that, and we have tried to meet all of the town's requirements. But I think that I would implore this board to do whatever possible to allow us to continue to be viable and be a part of this community.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll respond to a few of the comments that were made by Mr. Federley, and hopefully point you in a direction that's reasonable and that will afford you an opportunity to make a reasonable decision under the circumstances. First of all, Tom's a very good lawyer. I think, however, he mischaracterized the planning board's decision. That decision has to be viewed as favorable to the applicant on all but the one determination that they made, which was that we failed to meet the standard, section 15 of the shoreline zoning ordinance. You can't infer anything, as Tom does, that there were numerous deficiencies, and that's the only one that they articulated. I would now direct you to the appeals provisions, and to the extent that they may vary from ordinance to ordinance that's being considered here tonight, I guess I'll focus on the commercial development review ordinance, because that's the one under which we filed our application. So presumably, yes, sir.
Point of order. Yeah. I'm not sure that that's correct, that it was filed under the commercial development review ordinance.
Well,
the appeal that we're hearing is for a denial of an application, I believe it's 1118 shoreline zoning ordinance, and that did not involve the CDRO.
Okay, all right. Either way, the appeal provision the appeal provisions will say that even if it's a de novo review, you only overturn the board if you find that there's that their decision was clearly contrary to the provisions of the ordinance. Yeah, clearly contrary. So it isn't simply that you might think, oh, maybe they should have done it differently. So, with that being said, you have to accept their decision unless you find it clearly contrary as to all of the other criteria that were in play, the planning board review process. And the one that we come away with is the shoreland zoning provisions and the board's determination that we were deficient in the terms of the number of square feet that we have. Well, your shoreland zoning ordinance addresses non-conforming lots. This is a non-conforming lot. It is not 60,000 square feet. It is not 40,000 square feet, but it is a non-conforming lot. It has existed longer in time than your ordinance has been in place. It's a lawfully non-conforming lot. And your ordinance at page 19, section E says, regarding non-conforming lots, they may be built on without the need for a variance, provided such lot is in separate ownership and not contiguous with any other lot. It's not in the same ownership, and that the state minimum lot size law and subsurface disposal rules are complied with. And they are. It meets the minimum lot size in the state, and we have a valid subsurface wastewater disposal system. The application would be on file here. We even showed you where the leach field is. So it is a non-conforming lot. It's in the limited commercial district. If you assume for the moment that there is commercial activity that has been occurring on this lot, it's not unlawful. It's permitted under your ordinance. Should a separate permit have been applied for? Maybe, but you've heard the history. You understand that at least as of 2008, if not before, there were docks, there were boats that were rented from these docks. Now there are slips that are rented at these docks. That's not a material difference. There is ongoing commercial activity. The docks themselves, we contend, and your ordinance makes it pretty clear, are not subject to your review or the planning board's review. So the commercial activity that we're talking about has to be whatever is taking place. Now, with respect to the docks, all that's taking place is people walking back and forth. I don't know what the picture was of a vehicle there, but that may be a one point in time thing, but you've heard the testimony from people tonight about how they access the docks. And it's consistent with the way we described it, it's consistent with the way Mr. Grant described it. So you can certainly find that this is a non-conforming lot and that it may be used for a commercial purpose, and that if necessary, you could find that we have to convert that residence. Hate to have that gentleman have to leave his residence. Maybe he wouldn't have to. We could try to work that out, but we can convert that to commercial use, and it'll be a commercial lot if that's what it takes. But there aren't two principal uses on the property at that point in time, and it's a grandfathered lot, and we should be able to do what we wish to do with that lot. To the extent that the commercial development review ordinance is in effect or in play here, as Mr. Federley himself notes, it would appear that the 2017 ordinance, which is the one that we're dealing with, was adopted to implement, in his words, the 2014 comprehensive plan. We've been on this lot, we've been doing the activities that we've described long before 2017. Long before 2017. If this ordinance is to be applied to all existing uses, then, as many of these people have said, we've got a real problem in town because there are a lot of existing uses, and I don't think when somebody adds a table at a restaurant that all of a sudden they've got to come before the planning board or before you because you've adopted an ordinance that's now in play as of 2017. Don't think somebody, no, we'll leave it at the table in the restaurant as the example. So, one, you can say, yep, there's been an activity, a commercial activity on this property. This is a continuation of that activity. It's an undersized lot, it's a grandfathered lot. You can't have two uses on it, but if he wants to have one, he can. Or you could easily conclude that the commercial activity spawned by the docks is nothing more than people walking back and forth, and that's not an activity that you're going to regulate. Okay. I think we're all set. Do you have anything else?
Andy, Sean, do you have anything else?
I don't think so.
At that point, you can go into deliberations. Don't worry about me, I'm gonna get these over to, yeah, we can keep those as part of the record. So.
So you want to make sure but we ought to explain about what happens during deliberations. So the next phase of this is deliberation among the board members. At this point, it ends the opportunity for the public to provide comments. We may ask questions of the people who are here, but this is like the work session for this group to have a discussion in a public forum over the information we received, and we may have questions, but the public comment is quick. We won't take 5.
We'd like to take a 5-minute break before we start our deliberations.
Smoke if you got
Either way, I was not gonna say. I'm sure Megan's already in bed. I do, and I wasn't fully charged this morning, so I'm gonna have to charge it with you.
Met your wife. That's on the west side. Yeah, right next to Donahue. Yeah, okay. Likewise.
Just mention something. All right, we'll see you. Okay. Yeah, drive safely. Mr. Nino, I just wanted to mention something I noticed on the right. Administrative appeal, and within administrative appeal, it's either a no vote. Hey, George.
Hey, Ben. Down, going back.
that what it is?
It is.
Yeah, I haven't. I rented that down there years ago. I noticed when I was on boats, different kind of boats. Like a family coming in the house.
I can't get my butt. Tell the man upstairs.
Yeah. How you doing? Yeah, a lot of visitors.
Yeah, we just had a photo there, and I got Saturday, I got my granddaughter, my great grandson.
Actually, it's Jersey.
And then my son, my grandson, and his girlfriend coming up on Wednesday.
How old are they?
Well, he's in the police court.
Yeah. Have you always had a lot of visitors?
Oh, yeah. You know where you're at?
I guess he's in the front row, dude. I thought that, like I said earlier,
You better vote on this tonight?
Isn't it? Pretty nice town. Yeah. You know Robert. You know the field. I was
They're still fighting.
Oh, yeah. No, Rick. I don't know Rick.
Is there somebody right there?
George is sitting there.
We'll take you every day about it. So we'll just work it doesn't come up from it's fine. Is that one on the end of the small lot?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that was that. Yeah, I wish you could see so hard. Come on. We're all in the boat.
Elizabeth, your neighbor. How are you? Are these, anybody sitting here?
No.
Alan was next to me, somebody's seat. Alan was.
Yeah, he's gone.
Paul has 6 calendars since I left work. 6 calendar meetings. I'm always in for Sea Dogs.
Where's Max? Oh, not in his chair.
Busted out work. Yeah, and after. Dealing with writing store procedures and horrible.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Nicholas.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene the hearing. It's 9 o'clock. I'd like to entertain any of the members of the board. Do they have specific questions to ask of Andy or Mr. Grant? No?
Do you believe you are still operating in a home occupation business?
I live there. When I applied, when I wanted to permit a boatyard, I met with our CEO and we talked about some options. He said, "Where you live here, this is the application you should fill out," and we did.
Excuse me, Sean, you live at 21?
I do.
And your renter is at?
24.
Thank you.
And I'll throw out just for good measure, I don't have to live at 21 either if it satisfies the board's needs somehow. I can build another house. We have the technology.
Craig could probably build you another house too.
Yeah, we might need to build 2.
And I think the other thing that has confused the process along the way is not under, I think that part of the deed of 21 is across the street. One of those lots is on the deed of 21.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking.
Oh, no.
Would you please repeat that?
That one of the lots that's across the street that's being discussed here is, even though it's contiguous, is that the right word? It's on the deed of 21 Hewlin.
Oh.
So when we had a permit application for 21 Hewlin, I think the assumption was that.
Here's a matter of fact. I'm sorry. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Go right ahead.
When you applied for the home occupation permit, did you do any research or have any discussions with anyone as to what constituted the limits of the home occupation as opposed to?
No, again, I met with the CEO, told him what I wanted to do, and he said, this is the application you need to fill out.
And you believe you're doing the same thing now that you did
right along
in 2008?
In a greater capacity, certainly. Exact same thing.
Did you ever read the shoreline zoning ordinance?
I've skimmed it, sure.
To understand that lots on opposite side of public way, even if they're in the same ownership, are considered?
That was just brought to my attention in the last year or so.
Okay.
Again, when I came here 23 years ago, I bought this chunk and this chunk.
Right.
And they were on the same deed, and when I got permitted, I'm assuming, because this was my primary access to the water at the time, you know, and then seeing 21 on my application wasn't shocking because I live at 21, you know? But I mean, again, a boatyard, the reason it made sense to ask for the permit, it's truly the simple is because I had a launch, because I had shorefront, a place to launch boats from, to retrieve them, to test them from, to sell them from.
I think it would be a pretty big stretch to think that somebody would apply for a boat-related business on waterfront without assuming that you're going to use that. I mean, I think that the nature of the business.
So you believe at the time it should have been assumed?
Well, we thought up until last year, we thought that was included.
Slips and things like that. Is that your?
This is my 5th entrepreneurial experience. Growing small businesses is what I've been trained to do.
But we were under the assumption, and when we called the CEO about the docks, we said, "Go ahead. We don't have a dock ordinance." There was no discussion about, well, that's across the street. We've had advertisements, we've had signs at the end of the street. You saw it was a 2009 Summertime in the Belgrades did a feature with a picture of the boat and the dock. Certainly if there was an inclination that wasn't what we were permitted for, there wouldn't be that publication or, you know, and I think it makes sense to the average person that if you're on a lake, on the water, and you're doing a boat business,
you're using the water.
It just seems like a reasonable work. And we've tried very hard to do whatever the town has asked us to do.
The chair's asked me to sort of maybe kind of frame this a little bit, because obviously we've had a lot of chance to ask questions in that part of the hearing to be done. So I think in terms of whether you have any questions in terms of the process, I think as the chair lays it out in the outline, there are 3 ordinances which apparently are at play. You did hear some arguments on both sides in terms of what de novo means and whether all 3 ordinances are in place. So certainly I have questions about that. You can discuss those, you can ask me. My suggestion would be that you look at the criteria that you need to apply and start to have those discussions. I think one of the first questions is this a commercial use? Because that comes into play, I think, under any ordinance, commercial development ordinance, the shoreland ordinance. There are questions in terms of what it takes to have a commercial use under the shoreland, and same with minimum lot size. So I think one of the threshold questions, it was also raised, is this commercial just because people walk across it? So I think you ought to come to that conclusion of whether it's commercial, and then work through the criteria that you think have to be met with this application.
just one other comment as you talk about it, a takeaway from some of what I heard in the arguments, just so that maybe you aren't confused, or if you're confused when I say this, you can ask me more questions. There's a difference between a lot, a structure, and a use. The question is whether this is a commercial use. There's been discussion of whether the docks need a permit. And I think that would be a question of whether they're applying to put the docks in a structure. And what I understand they're applying for is a commercial use. So the docks are really not an issue. So the discussion about whether you're permitting the docks, you're not. You're permitting the use. You're not permitting any structures because no structures have been requested. There's a house on the lot, which is a structure, but it's already there. Then it comes down to what has the use of the property been. Last comment on the question of whether it's a grandfathered lot. Lots are created. Sometimes they're cut and create 2 lots. Sometimes they're added to, and 2 small lots become 1 lot, which is, I think, what happened here. But the question here is not whether the lot itself is grandfathered. It's whether the use of that lot is grandfathered. So again, kind of like the structure, we're really not talking about the lot itself being grandfathered. That's a question of whether you can then cut another piece of it off or add to it. So that may come up in discussion, but I think you need to look at this as a use as opposed to a structure or a lot. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if you're more confused now or.
That does help. So should we do like a straw poll to, I think the fundamental question of is it a commercial use is, that's got to be answered first.
Well, I think rather than poll, maybe just, open up for discussion. Several of you can talk about it.
Is what a commercial use? The walking across the property to get to the dock.
The uses we've heard tonight and through the materials we have, do you feel like he's operating a commercial use?
The application 1118, I believe, specifically was for commercial. You stated it as a commercial use, and some of the documentation that's been provided, I think some of Andy Dunbar's communications specifically refer to the intended use to be a commercial use, if that helps you at all.
I think from everything we've heard, that it is a commercial use. I think that the presentation that Mr. Bear gave us, and acknowledged that it is a commercial use, and that we should proceed accordingly.
Is that okay now?
Yes, that's my inclination. It is a commercial use.
Gregor, do you think it's a commercial use?
Yes.
Okay. Sam?
Yes.
I do too as well.
So does that then take us to the commercial use sections of the 3 ordinances?
Yeah.
That we've got?
And it seems to me that the minimum lot size ordinance is probably not in play, because I believe one of the provisions of that is that if the land in question is a shoreland, in the shoreland zone, then the shoreland zone ordinance takes precedence, precludes, however you want to express it.
I think to the extent it conflicts, it would. There may be other provisions.
I think it's an actual statement.
It could be. There are other provisions. One of the ones I'm thinking of is the road frontage. I think is also an issue, and it's not present in the shoreline zoning ordinance, because shoreline zoning doesn't deal with road frontage, whereas minimum lot size does. So I think those are 2 different criteria. You've got shore frontage, and then you've got road frontage.
Okay. I understand.
He said that again. Can I say something a minute?
No, sorry.
No, sorry, George. Just looking at the minimum lot size ordinance, and I think all you'd be looking at is a commercial use, which is D, and not 4D. For example, it has an area for the lot, which I think is the same as shoreline zoning, but it also has criteria for a boundary line factor, and which is not in shoreline zoning. So it's not, doesn't conflict with shoreline zoning, but it adds to it. And then it has a road frontage requirement, which again is not in shoreline zoning, because shoreline zoning only talks about your waterfront requirements and your setbacks. It doesn't talk about roads. So if this has a road issue, I think those criteria under the minimum lot size have to be met.
So then you suggest that we go through
those
D, A, B, C, and work on those?
Okay, so what's been testified tonight is that the lot in question does not have the 60,000 feet, correct, required?
Perhaps for the benefit of folks that are here, we just read that the commercial use ordinance, the first requirement is that it have a lot area of at least 60,000 square feet. And this does not.
It does not, in my opinion.
Well,
from what's been testified to tonight?
25,000.
Yes. 25,000. In lieu of the 60,000 required.
And well, the next one is the boundary, the form factor. We didn't discuss that one.
Okay, and in this, it says, have a boundary line form factor within which 90-foot radius circle can be described and have at least 200 feet of road frontage.
Can a 90-foot circle be inscribed?
You might ask Andy. Andy might be able to. Can a 90-foot circle be
inscribed in the?
Yeah.
In 24.
In 24.
Thanks, George. I say no, but.
Are you reading from the minimum lot size ordinance?
Yeah.
Page 10.
Page 10.
Andy, you, just to give you a point of reference, I think in one of the submissions, you showed an 89-foot distance from shore to road. It would be, I think.
Is this that one also?
Okay. Oh, way over on the western boundary, you've got 89.8 plus 19.5.
Okay.
Over here, you've got 110. So I think there's a pretty good chance that a 90-foot circle
would get one in there. Yeah.
Would fit into this portion of the property. When I first looked at it initially, I didn't think so because of what I saw over here.
Right.
But I think over here.
Yeah, I think so.
And the road frontage?
Yeah, the road frontage has to be 200 feet.
So it's 224.
24?
Yeah.
So yes, yes, and
these two, and that may very well be. So this was it next ownership with this partner. So, this is still in mixed ownership between Mark and Sean.
So we next will attack the standards under shoreline zoning.
So you got the 5758.
Which is section 15?
Section 15, yes.
Okay.
So at the time in '08, it was exclusively in the you had the 3 lots over here. 57 and for section 50, not is that what they gave you?
And then Mark and I co-own that.
Okay, so this is always been set. Ed was asking, you've got a 1.6 acre figure in your.
So we got the same 60,000 square foot requirement.
And then the so. Well, do you want to move on to the, do you have a question over it?
I just don't have the.
She has
the
okay.
minimal lot size.
Okay.
Just so I can read it.
Okay. So on the shoreline zoning, maybe a couple issues that I think I see coming up. So one, you've got the land use standards, lot size standards, which you were just talking about. And then another is the issue that was raised tonight, that also was raised by the planning board, which was referenced, which was if you have 2 uses. And that's, so you've got the lot standards, which are 15A, and then I guess 15A5 is the section that talks about if you have a dwelling and a multiple structures, multiple uses. So you might want to deal with that, but so those are 2 separate issues.
We need 60,000 for the commercial, we need 40,000 for residential. And this section here, the section 5 says that, well, actually the section that I was looking at is 3, talks about lots in common ownership on opposite sides of the road shall be considered just separate term, or like this. That's, but we've already established that one. So then it is 5 where you've got a residential use and you've got a commercial use, which is 2 uses. Which means you've got 40 plus 60, which gives you 100,000 square foot requirement.
And just to be clear, I mean, I'll read it. So it says if more than one residential dwelling unit or more than one principal governmental, institutional, commercial, or industrial structure or use or combination thereof. So that would be a combination of uses is constructed or established. So again, it doesn't have to be constructed like a building. It's a use can be established within the shoreline zone. All dimensional requirements shall be met for each additional dwelling unit or principal structure or use. And the question was raised whether it's a principal use, but there's a residential use, I think clearly. And then the question is the commercial use part of the residential use, or is it a separate use? And it seems it's 2 uses from what you're saying. So then the question is, do you then have to apply all these lot standards for each? So you can apply them separately for the commercial use, but then also determine whether they would be met if they were combined. And the reason I say that is because there's been some suggestion that they would remove the residence. I don't know if that's formally been removed, but you can answer the question for both. If the residence isn't there, does it meet the commercial standards? And if the residence is there, does it meet both together? That makes sense?
It does, but the lot has 25,000 square feet, which is less than 40.
Either way.
So either way, it doesn't have the minimum lot size.
Right.
It just,
yeah, you can clarify.
It's closer.
You can clarify.
Just its residence.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that the board make a determination on why the non-conforming lot standard isn't applicable? And we would make it a formal amendment of our application. I don't know if you were thinking that if the board wanted to impose that condition of non-residential use or no residential use, then we would accept that as an amendment to our application or condition.
So you could address it if the board accepts it as an amendment to the permit. You can then just address this as only a commercial use because the understanding is that the house, that could be a condition where you approve it, that the house would no longer be occupied. The question of the non-conforming lot, I understand what Mr. Barrer is saying. The lot itself is non-conforming. And again, that goes back to the question of, but the use is not may or may not be grandfathered, but the use has never been permitted as a commercial use. Therefore, it wasn't legally existing at the time, so it's not grandfathered. So the non-conforming lot piece, this isn't a question of whether the lot has changed, it's a question of whether the use has changed.
No. If it's a non-conforming lot, one can apply for a commercial use on a non-conforming lot.
But the lot then has to conform to the use that's being applied for.
No, it's in a limited commercial district.
So the use is permitted if it meets the criteria, but it was not being used for, well, and maybe it was.
No, I don't.
It was not being used for a commercial use at the time that the shoreline zoning ordinance was enacted. Because that's what we're talking about here. The question, and that's just another point. There are questions about effective dates, but we're looking at the shoreline zoning ordinance, which I'm not sure when all the amendments were made, but it's been in existence for quite some time.
Is it this board's consensus opinion that if a lot is non-conforming, that it can't be used for a commercial purpose even when it is in a commercial zone? Is that the position that this board is taking?
That's my understanding.
I don't understand
No,
that.
I know.
The initial permit was for the residents and about building and repair. Wouldn't that be a commercial from the get-go?
But that was on the other side of the road.
That's on the other side of the road.
That was on
It's a
24.
different lot.
Can I just say, the question isn't whether it's in a limited commercial zone. The question is whether it meets the development criteria within the limited commercial zone. So just the fact that it's in a limited commercial zone does not mean any commercial development can exist there. It means the criteria for development that exist within the limited commercial zone apply. So that's what we're applying.
And another way to look at that, it's a good point, is if the use had been ongoing at the time the ordinance was enacted and it was on an undersized lot, yes, it would be grandfathered. But if the ordinance went into effect and there was not a commercial use, the fact that the lot was there and being used residentially doesn't mean that the change to a commercial use is automatic. Grandfathered, which is essentially the idea.
I beg your indulgence just for one other side note regarding the 2008 permit. You have a copy of that application. It does refer to 21 Hewlin Road, which is where the residence is located. It also refers to 1.6 acres, which encompasses the property on the other side of the road, as either Sean or Andy pointed out. The lot to the far right, the left rather, was part of the purchase of that, and that application says 1.6 acres. It's describing the house as being on that side of the road, 21 Hewlin Road. That application plainly says 1.6 acres.
That was a figure supplied by the applicant.
Yeah, and the applicant.
And that may not have been a correct value.
I offer it only for the observation, and you could for the observation that in order to have 1.6 acres, you have to include the shorefront side of the road that he owned at that time in 2008.
How does in the land use standards, in section sub 3, it says lots in common ownership located on opposite sides of a public or privately owned road shall be considered each a separate tract or parcel of land, unless such road was established by the owner of land on both sides thereof after September 1971, which is what lot is. Okay, so why would it be considered two separate anyhow?
I'm not suggesting that it's not two separate lots, but the application for home occupation, as Mr. Grant testified, was made with the understanding that he would be launching his boats. That's where the launch area is. That would be ancillary to what was going on the home site. So that application was for 1.6 acres, and when it was approved for 1.6 acres.
And that includes the lots on both sides of the road?
Yes.
That's what you're saying?
It includes this lot, this half. He didn't own this one at the time, he owned that one.
It also has a map and lot number, it has the address as map and lot 2658. Which one's 58?
I don't know.
Going to the
You want
west.
to be on the south side of the road.
So that's a different lot.
It is, I'm only pointing out that the application was for, you could say a lot, I could say 1.6 acres.
Well, you could, but the application says map 26 lot 58.
Because that's where the residence.
But that's what he's applying for, was a home occupation permit at the residence.
And my home was that and that lawn. Again, that lawn is why it made sense to ask for the permit.
I understand that, I'm just trying to boil this down to figure out, no, there's, I'm sorry, there's no opportunity for comment. But that's, is that a separate lot number?
It is a separate lot number, but when I bought it, it was all on the same deed as it
I know
still
that,
is.
But in this application where it says map 26 lot 58, that's the one that's on the south side of the road? Is that?
One of them.
I'm sorry?
One of them.
Yep. Well, yeah.
And the next page after that, is that the handwritten part, is that part of the application?
I'm sorry, but it does say 1.6 acres, and it says lot 58, so
Right.
which?
Well, that's
are
what,
we
that's the discussion point.
Yes.
Well, the ordinance, in effect at the time, the shoreline zoning ordinance, had in it stipulation that lots on opposite side of a public way are separate lots, regardless of what the applicant puts in the application for a lot area. The ordinance governs, in my opinion.
Yes, go ahead, Matt. Yeah, I agree with that, and to add, sort of a moot point, because we already established that it's commercial use, so we've gone beyond the home occupation use, so whatever that original application said is moot, because we're now discussing a commercial use, which is totally different than home occupation.
How is commercial totally different than a home occupation? A home occupation is a commercial endeavor.
Not according to the ordinance.
According to what?
Not according to the ordinance.
If you look at the definition of a home occupation.
You don't get to make money?
I'm sorry?
You don't get to make money?
Yeah. you got that part right. The home occupation is something that is normally conducted in a residential structure or in a residential lot. It's a residential, it's a specific kind of home occupation that is very limited in terms of extent and amount of traffic it would generate.
Can I see that definition?
Yes.
Actually, they can review it over there, you don't have to provide it to
Sure.
I guess the other part of the question is, the second page of the application, that's what I was referring to, says 21 Hewlin Road, and it says a business type, which is boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing, which has no reference to dockage. So the permit that was granted in 2008 was for that purpose.
Right.
So the question that got us there was the minimum lot size standards as listed in the shoreline zoning ordinance. And because we've already identified that it is a commercial use and there is a residence on there, then per the ordinance, they need to have a total of 100,000 square feet for 2 uses.
Actually, sir, I think, just to clarify that, I think Mr. Barrow just formally withdrew the home use. So I think we're back to what they're asking for specifically is just a commercial use. So it's 60, and then the frontage issue. So there are two criteria for commercial use.
And so we've already established that it's 25,000 square feet. How much shore frontage is there?
Just over 200.
200, so there's less than 300 square feet. And 300 feet of frontage also required. The rough issues in there that we need to address.
I'm still puzzled by this. Let's take a simpler example of someone wanting to build a residence on a 39,000 square foot lot that has existed, been a lot of record. It's a non-conforming lot because it's not 40,000 square feet. Are you saying that they can't build a house on a 39,000 square foot lot? Is that your point?
Our point is, I'm not prepared to address that. I'm addressing the commercial.
Okay. So is it your position that a person with a 25,000 square foot lot of record can't have a commercial enterprise on that lot?
Yes.
Yeah. Not a new one.
No.
That's great. If it was grandfathered.
Then yes.
Yes.
I understand grandfathered use and I understand lots. I don't think that the two necessarily overlap. You have a lot, it's a non-conforming lot. You have a provision, a relief valve in your ordinance that allows those lots to be built upon. It says it right there.
And actually,
can be built upon.
Not to interrupt you, but I was just going to say that I think the part you had read from before, so now you've just reiterated, is may be built upon, but this is not a building permit, this is a use permit. So it goes back to whether it's a permitted use or a permitted structure. Because again, we're not talking about whether the docks could be built or installed and whether or not it's.
Well,
the relief valve you're talking about is maybe built upon. This lot's already been built upon.
Well, but you could build a building, and if you live in it, you're using it as a residence.
You could build a structure, but that does not mean you get the use. To answer your question.
So you couldn't have a residence on a 39,000 square foot lot. You could build a building, but you couldn't do anything with it. That's your point.
Actually, without a variance.
Don't need a variance. You can't get a use variance.
Well, that's a different discussion. There's a different criteria for variance. Well, so we have
thank you.
We've told ourselves
Thank you for indulging.
and concluded that it is a commercial use.
Yep. And
as such, it requires 60,000 square feet and 300 feet of uninterrupted shore frontage.
I'm sorry, but I'm still stuck on the fact that he was granted a permit in 2008 for the use of 1.6 acres.
He was permitted for use at 21 Hewlin Road.
Plus 1.6 acres. It says it on the thing.
Wait,
Hold it. I'm sorry, but this isn't an opportunity for folks to comment.
He was granted a permit in 2008
right.
to have home occupation and a boat repair business, which included boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing. At map 26, lot 58, which we agree, I agree even, is on the south side of Hewlin Road. But the 1.6 acres, that lot is not 1.6 acres itself. It has to include other land.
Yes, he was. That was Mr. Grant's interpretation when he put that figure in the application, is my understanding. He said he felt that his entire lot was 1.6 acres.
Well, it was actually surveyed to 1.6. I didn't pull it out of the air.
Sure.
So for the
Sorry,
tax records,
what did they survey it?
But the other part of this, Norma, is that section 15.3 that says that lots on opposite sides of the road are considered separate parcels.
But they granted that.
Yeah, they granted it.
So how is that?
They granted him for boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing, 8 to 4 daily, Brightside boat services.
A home occupation.
A home occupation.
At lot 58.
On 1.6.
On the sub, it's two separate by the ordinance. I didn't write this thing.
I'm not arguing.
I'm just trying to point out that in this ordinance it says they're two separate ordinances. They're two separate parcels. I can't speak to the acreage in it, but it's clear that it's two separate parcels.
I believe when he came in 2008,
sorry, sir.
he described the boat, to use a proper term, the boat services of boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing, and I'm going to speculate, but I don't know that it matters legally or not, because we've already sort of determined that the ordinance piece. So I believe that when he filed that application in 2008, it wasn't about lot size, it was about use, and the use was, I planned to open up this varnishing, cleaning, repair business. It's incidental to my, I'm gonna do it in the garage, you know, whatever. It's incidental to my residence, therefore it's a home occupation.
And he was granted permission to do that?
Yes.
And
I think he would have been granted that permission if he had .58 lot. You know, because the lot size, as I understand, didn't.
So nobody disagrees he has permission to do this on 8 across the street?
On lot 58.
On 21 Hill, yes.
Yes.
The question before us is the other side of the road.
I know.
So we need to, we need to poll the members with regard to the finding on 15A.
It seems as though you have consensus, but there may be.
Yeah. Poll them.
I wonder, can we do this again later? I'd like to digest some of this stuff actually and think about it a little bit. I hate to keep everybody, but there's a lot to look at.
Well, I think we could take a poll as to what our consensus is on this, on 15.
Well, I think if we break it down, we're not making a final decision on the whole piece, but if we try to break this down into pieces, we've already addressed the piece of commercial use. We've addressed the pieces that come from the minimum lot size. Now we've got some pieces that come from the shoreline zoning. Perhaps we can address those, and maybe that will help with some clarity. But the next piece is with regard to the commercial use, that again says the 60,300 feet of shore frontage.
I have a question. If he was granted permission to do this with the 1.56 acres, and we have no jurisdiction over the docks, how can we say that what he's doing hasn't already been given to him?
It wasn't part of his home occupation application.
But he said that that was part of his home occupation, that land.
I mean, it doesn't make reference to, in the second page of the application, there's no reference to boat slips, rentals.
Well, sir, every small business grows.
Kayaks. It only describes boat cleaning, painting, and varnishing. It doesn't describe these other uses that his entrepreneurial spirit said, hey, I've got all this land, let me maximize my use of, at least further development.
And we have an ordinance that says they have to be treated as two separate parcels. Right. And again, this is not, you know, I mean, our.
Right, I just don't understand why the planning board would do that.
We're not, I can't.
And that's just like, that's where I'm a little concerned.
The challenge before us is, by the voters in the town, we've been handed documents that we are required to interpret, whether we like them, agree with them or not. Our job is not to be subjective. Our job is to take a look at what we have in front of us and look at the documents and say, where does it line up?
My question is, I don't understand how a board could do that.
But and I think that's a separate discussion.
So what is the status of the lot on 2430, the combined lots on the north side of Hoover? The status of that property is, it's what, commercial?
Well, that's what we're working through now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about 21. That's,
okay.
His use of 21 is not even on the table. Yep, we're on the other side of the road.
And so if we go to section 15, which is page 36 of the shoreline, because I think unanimously stated, we believe he's operating a commercial use. We now, I think what Jay's trying to direct us towards is, we're now looking at page 36, section 15. We scroll down to the commercial section, which is the A1B. And we ask ourselves, okay, as I read the ordinance, does a lot at 24 have 60,000 square feet? and determined it as 25,000 plus. Does it have 300 square feet, 300 feet, forgive me, of uninterrupted shore frontage, and it's got 224.
Sorry, that was road. That was road. I think shore was 200 plus or minus.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. 224 was actually the road frontage.
Yeah.
Close.
Is there another section, is there another piece to that section that we need to?
So the answer to that question, no, it doesn't. You get maybe.
Well, I think that's just a matter of, you know, it says 60,000, he's got 25, it says 300, he's got 200. That's, we're just accepting their figures on those things. And I don't think there's anything else that applies to this application.
We go by the three. So I think you have to go through the checklist on this is commercial development. Assuming you think that applies.
So do you have a checklist for commercial development? So now we transition to commercial development review ordinance.
Yes.
That's on that ordinance?
It's on page 18.
Each of the three separate. Put them all three together.
So I think it's, yeah, I've got 19 on my Article 6 development standards.
Review criteria is Article 5.
I don't know, will that address use at all, or will this sort of be structured? What I'm seeing so far is really just about square footage of, you know, it certainly is one of the challenges of this application is that not necessarily commercial structures
But it's
on
use.
the lot, but
It's the
you know, that's
commercial
why
use.
we're looking at usage.
I think the key that the key that the planning board focused on in line depending and reading the materials that according to the CDRO, all other ordinances have to be met, including shoreline zone. So if it's in the shoreline zone, then it's shoreline zone. So
It doesn't need one.
right, exactly.
It's not even split.
But we still should go through.
Oh, I agree.
Yes, that's right. And that's page 18.
Yeah, I think Norman's actually got it right. Actually, the simplest way is to go through the review criteria.
Which is
Checklist.
Article 5.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Norman.
Page 18. Commercial development review. Page 18. Yeah, so we should go through each one of those and yes, no, unknown. Or it doesn't apply. Some of these.
Does everybody have the paper, page? The application is complete, and applicable review fee has been paid. Yes. Proposal conforms to all applicable provisions of this ordinance.
Well, we're gonna come back to that.
Although you can probably address it and move on, only because I think you've made findings of the two ordinances that it didn't.
No. That's true.
So just make sure everybody's in agreement on that.
Yeah, can you speak up louder, because I can't
Okay, so the proposal conforms to all applicable provisions of this ordinance.
Which includes links to shoreline zoning minimum lot size, which we've already found. So the answer to that one is no.
The proposed activity will not cause unreasonable soil erosion or a reduction in land's capacity to hold water so that the an unsound or unhealthy condition results.
We didn't find
anything. The proposed activity will not have an adverse impact on freshwater wetlands and or a water body such as a lake, pond, or stream. So,
we didn't find it. We didn't discuss it. There was no information provided that suggested it.
The proposed activity will provide for adequate storm water management. Proposed activity will provide for adequate sewage disposal.
Proposed that one may be not applicable because there was no sewage.
Yeah. Well, what is the septic system? No, that's the septic system that's there for the house, right?
As far as
people don't.
As far as I can tell from the evidence, yeah, the house is used for a house, and that's got its own, and
right.
there's
Right.
no
That's the one that's
there's no bathroom facilities for people.
No provision.
It's an outhouse. Okay. Nobody's emptying their boats.
Yeah.
The black water.
Proposed activity will not adversely affect any floodplain areas and will conform to the applicable requirements of the Town of Belgrade Floodplain Management Ordinance.
Yes.
Yep. Proposed activity will not result in air or water pollution.
No.
Proposed activity has sufficient water available for current and foreseeable needs of development. Plenty of water. Proposed activity will not, along or in conjunction with existing activities, adversely affect the quality or quantity of groundwater. Proposed activity will dispose of solid waste in conformance with and local regulations, that the type of quality waste proposed to be sent to the town facilities will not exceed their capacity.
Not applicable.
Yes. Yeah, I guess to the extent they had a trash can or something, but that's not going to be an issue.
The applicant has sufficient right, title, or interest to undertake the development. Yes. Proposed activity will not have a significant detrimental effect on adjacent land uses or other properties that might be affected by waste, noise, glare, fumes, smoke, dust, odors, or their effects.
Oops, I guess it goes to the next page.
Sorry about that. The proposed activity will not have a significant detrimental effect on adjacent land uses or other properties that might be affected by waste, noise, glare, fumes, smoke, dust, odors, or their effects. The proposed activity will not cause unreasonable highway.
I just want to make sure, did you get an answer on that one? I did.
That was a no.
No, that's it. Yeah, that was fine. Yeah, I just.
The proposed activity will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion or unsafe conditions with respect to the use of the highways or roadways existing or proposed. The proposed activities, to the maximum extent possible, will not have an adverse effect on the scenic or natural beauty of the area, aesthetics, historic sites, significant wildlife habitat, identified by, identified with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and/or the Town of Belgrade, or rare or irreplaceable natural areas of public rights, physical or visual access to the shoreline.
we really didn't make a finding about that. I don't know how we would go about doing that.
Well, I guess one question was there evidence that would suggest, you have to make the finding. The question was, there any evidence that suggested that it was going to impact any of those things? No.
The proposed activity shall conform to all the applicable requirements of the town's shoreland zoning ordinance, minimum lot size, and all other local ordinances.
No, it does not.
So that's the one that you discussed earlier, but that's based on the other findings, no. Okay.
The proposed activity provides safe and adequate parking.
Yes.
Okay, so, now, question. We have found this to be a commercial use. But as we went through this, were we looking at this as specifically a marina as a commercial use, a type of commercial use, or something? Because if it were to be a full-blown marina, I'm not sure that the answers to all of those questions would necessarily be what we just gave. Yeah. And if the use that's being considered is specifically just the ability to traverse and get to the docks and back, and there's no storage of anything on the property, and that's what's, and we were to approve it in some way, then you don't want to get creep of the intensity of use over time. So,
right.
Do we need to qualify?
I don't believe so. The use that was applied for is essentially, as described, docks in the water, and then the ability to walk across. So there was no restaurant, there was no storage building, there was no, so it's as described. The only thing requested at this point would have been the use, which was to load, unload, walk across.
Okay, so we don't really qualify it beyond that.
There was some temporary parking, I think that was the other one.
Right.
But that was just while they were unloading. If there was longer parking, that was down by the health center. Correct.
It's behind my garage.
It's on the property.
It's not on this property. The only parking that is on this property would be temporary while they're taking provisions out of a vehicle, perhaps putting it on a boat, and then the vehicle is moved. So we've gone through the criteria.
Yep.
So now, do we need to, should we, how do we proceed?
Well, in response to Norma's earlier question, I think we have a good sense. You could either articulate the reasons and vote, or we could prepare written findings and come back to make sure that everyone understands those. And we could prepare those based on what we've heard, and you're not formally voting now. And then come back later and then vote on them in writing so that it's clear what the action was.
And that would give you the opportunity to reflect more on.
I would appreciate that.
So do we need a motion to prepare findings based upon?
Yeah, you can. I don't think you really need an informal motion, but you can direct that we prepare findings based on the discussion and bring it back to you to review. Do you remember that? I think the deadline is 45 days?
45.
Yeah. Thanks.
After the,
so we'll,
after today.
We'll have to.
I think you have 35 days from the close of the public hearing to make your decision.
To make the decision.
45, no, 45
yeah, 45
days
to appeal.
To appeal.
I think we have a meeting scheduled July 26th.
I'm thinking, I hope not, because it's that, what's that, 26?
I don't know, it's next week, I wouldn't.
Yeah, that's 8 days, that's next Thursday?
That's not likely.
Yeah, it's not.
So can we set a date for the middle of August?
Yep. Do you have another meeting in August?
At the end of August.
Okay, so.
When is it?
The fourth weekend, fourth Wednesday.
The 22nd?
Yeah, if that is outside 25 days, the applicant could waive that.
I was gonna say, actually, I think it's 35 days.
35.
So the 22nd would be 34
That would be within
days.
So this is the 18th.
Yeah.
Is that agreeable?
So give me that date again.
It's August 22nd.
Yeah.
And that's 7 o'clock here.
So essentially, you could take a motion to table it, to review the draft findings on August 22nd, just so it's clear. Then the applicant, everybody else knows when you're coming back.
Thanks, guys.
I would move that we table this until August 22nd, at which time we'll review the findings. Letter of findings?
Draft findings.
Draft findings.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Yeah. We need to do another public notice?
No.
Okay, just.
Where do you agree?
You only have to tell them what.
Oh, you can agree.
Thanks, man.
We agree, yeah, Ed and I agree. So, yeah, by announcing it now, everybody's here knows, yep.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, motion's been made by Jay and seconded by Dick. All in favor? Motion's carried unanimous.
Are we ready for a motion to adjourn?
I second.
I'd love to be able to third.
All in favor?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, actually, should not talk about it, do not talk about it, so do not email.
Norma, just. We're not to discuss this.
Podcast my house.
Michelle, the decision's over, and that means amongst yourselves.
We can't talk about it among ourselves or with anybody else. Until we
Now we all deliberation.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Now,